Did you, by any chance, go to community college?
Yes, I did.
You did? How about that?
Paul Thomas Anderson has been mesmerizing us for nearly 30 years with his beautifully orchestrated one-takes, his incredible technical precision, and his unmatched ability to bring out the very best from every performer he works with.
Say it louder.
I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my boy!
With Licorice Pizza being the newest addition to his great resume, the question must be asked, is this one of his most divisive films?
I met the girl I'm gonna marry one day.
Is it his best? Maybe even his worst? Find out today as we discuss the best and the worst of Paul Thomas Anderson. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the best and the worst, and we got some hot takes coming your way today. Hello, everybody. I'm Andrew Ghai, joined as always by Ben Bateman, and today we're talking about Licorice Pizza, which is leading us to the best and the worst of Paul Thomas Anderson.
You know, he's a guy that I think we've been talking about since we've been friends. I mean, really, we've been friends for close to 10 years now, and he's a name that has come up constantly. We've both had strong opinions on his movies over the years. He's sort of like the ultimate hipster director for this generation. I mean, he's really inspired a whole new generation of movie fans to have active opinions. He's like a huge Twitter director, and it's fascinating to see where we stand right now as he just had a brand new film release.
Yeah, when you say Twitter director, I think to break that down for people that might not know exactly what you mean, it's basically what you're saying is that the movies that he produces, because of the stories or the characters that come out, I should say directs, but you know what I'm saying, there's a lot of discourse, or they're divisive, or there's just very, very varying opinions on these movies. And I think Licorice Pizza is a great film for us to talk about because, you know, my favorite movie from PT was always Boogie Nights. Yours was always Magnolia. But he's kind of changed a lot over the last 15 plus years as a director. So before we get into the episode, before we break down the best and the worst of Paul Thomas Anderson, before we talk in depth about Licorice Pizza, what's the best way that people can support this show?
Yeah, guys, this is a show called The Best and the Worst. It's where we break down the best and the worst film in a director, an actor, or a perhaps genre, or even like a franchise. We did The Best and Worst of Spider-Man recently. If you guys like that idea and you want to support the show, you guys can follow or subscribe, whether you're using the Apple Podcasts app or Spotify. If you guys want to leave a rating or review, it's very helpful for the show. If you like what you hear, just, 5 stars preferably, 4 stars, maybe even 3 stars. Please don't go below 3 stars. But whatever thoughts you have, leave those and engage. And that really is the best way you can support what we're doing here on The Best and the Worst.
Of course, and if you guys like listening to us, maybe you want to see what we look like, you can check out Action Industries on YouTube. And of course, you can support our Patreon, patreon.com/Team Action. You and I went to the movie theaters together just earlier this week. When's the last time you and I saw a movie in theaters together?
Prior to this?
Yeah.
It had been a while, I think.
Right?
We screened some stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
Pandemic stuff.
Yeah.
Like when stuff started to reopen, I know we screened like Snake Eyes together, didn't we? Or did you come to that?
When you said Snake Eyes, I thought of a completely different Snake Eyes.
A good Snake Eyes.
Yeah.
A high quality film.
Not the one that came out more recently, the one with the Phantom Punch and Nic Cage.
Yes.
A very good movie.
The Phantom Punch.
Phantom Punch. So we went and saw Licorice Pizza earlier this week, and it was a very unique experience because I think while we were watching the movie, the whole time we were having a good time.
Oh, yeah.
We were laughing. The time flew by pretty quickly. The two leads were incredibly endearing. I mean, looking at like Philip Seymour Hoffman live on through his son with Paul Thomas Anderson
really
was
sweet,
really, really cool. And then you talk about Haim as a band, like PT directing their music videos, and now she's starring in a movie.
Yeah.
And she does a great job. They both do an incredible job. But I think when we walked out of the movie and we kind of let the dust settle and let it all kind of sink in, I went from really enjoying that movie to trying to talk myself out of hating that movie.
Well, it's interesting because this movie is very divisive because of what the movie is. I think I leaned over to you early on in the film and I was like, this is the most Boogie Nights feeling PT movie I've seen since Boogie Nights, and it's so fun to watch.
And what you mean when you say that is like you're talking about moving through seamlessly, like having a good time, music lining up with the story perfectly, and it's just like you're on a ride.
Yeah.
You're on a ride that you don't want to get off of.
The atmosphere is perfect. I mean, if we were going to sort of break down about this movie, like what worked, what didn't work, and then like what really didn't work, you know what I mean? Like I think what worked is that you mentioned it. The performances in this movie are phenomenal. The writing is great. Like it really works in that sense. The atmosphere of this movie is really terrific. I
Yeah,
mean,
you talk about nostalgia. It
Oh my
feels like
God.
you are just put right into the 70s in Los Angeles. The set design, everything about it from top to bottom technically was pretty perfect.
oh my God, like I was so immersed in the movie while it was happening, and it's a testament to the quality of the good parts that the problematic stuff that we'll get to in a moment, I really didn't start confronting till we left the theater. It
Same.
really didn't start to, like, I didn't have to ask the question until after the ride was over. And I think it's a testament, again, to all the things that PT has done over the years that work. They work in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, what's so fascinating about this movie, and is if you're like a person that knows Paul Thomas Anderson's filmography well, you're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop for most of this movie. It just kind of moves from like scene to scene. You're falling more and more in love with the characters. There's kind of an overwhelming sense of dread at certain points because I think you're waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah.
But it's just a good time.
Yeah.
It's young love. I think it's the summertime. Like, you see these cameos come in. Again, the music works perfectly. The movie just moves so well that I think it's even funnier when you talk about not even being able to process it till it's over, because that's what you want as a director, right? You sign up for this ride, you're on it the whole entire time, and then when you're off, you're like, wow.
And what he gets out of, we talked about like performances across the board, he gets these wonderful moments out of small characters all throughout the movie. I mean, a lot of people have talked already about the Bradley Cooper sequence in this movie that's maybe 10 minutes total screen time. And he just dominates the screen while he's there. He's incredibly good. Sean Penn is in this movie and he's very engaging. All the big personalities, the cameos that show up, they're kind of all great. Like every one of them, no matter how much screen time they have. So by the end of the movie, I believe everything about this movie. I'm invested in the characters. I'm right there with it. And then there's the stuff I think that doesn't work before we get to the really doesn't work stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff that doesn't work for me in this movie, I'd say the number one thing, it's also kind of its greatest strength. It's kind of meandering at times. It's just sort of going, and as you said, you're waiting for something to happen, and nothing really does happen.
And he does a great job of kind of adding tension into the movie because of these things. You talk about like what happens with him and Bradley Cooper, whether it's the moment with the car, the moment with the bed, or like them, him running up the hill because his car's out of gas. And all those moments you have like that PTSD where you're like, oh man, something horrible is about to happen. And then there's the whole thing of their truck running out of gas. Right, and she just like somehow magnificently navigates down this hill backwards and forward. She becomes like a stunt car driver. And it's done so well. Like, the music drops out. It's so incredibly tense.
Yeah.
It just, again, it speaks to how well Paul Thomas has kind of sharpened that tool of his. But then the movie ends, and you sit back and you think about all the things that worked. And also when you talk about the movie meandering, you don't know how it's going to end until it ends. And then the moment it ends, from the moment that the movie ended till when we got outside the theater, from that like 5 minutes of time, my feelings about this movie had radically shifted because it was like, all right, that was the whole package. Now let's go back and reassess what we just saw.
Right. Well, I think one of the things I said to you was, it's kind of a coming of age story, right? And you're like, is it though? You're like, does he really, what happens? Does he really come of age?
Right. Does he learn anything? Does he do his qualities really change at all?
Yeah. And I mean, and again, testament to the performances, I think, by Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim. They're really wonderful.
They're so good.
I think I would argue they maybe are the strongest parts of the movie. Like, they both do such a good job. She especially just crushes it.
Yeah.
She's so believable in this role.
She's so funny. She has such a great, she's great comic timing. And then when you talk about Cooper Hoffman, he really does make, he's only 18 years old, but he does make you feel like what it felt like to be like a kid.
Yeah.
In high school.
He does, and so many of his scenes, there's a scene when he's auditioning for Maya Rudolph and he's doing the change with the vest and the coat. It's so funny, and it really just feels authentic. He captures what he always does, PT, with great performances out of people, no matter where they are in their career. And, it's like, if you ask me right now to bet you, will that be the best performance of one of their careers? The answer is yes. I would bet money that it will be the best performance of one of their two careers.
And if you want to talk about people that are storied, that are seasoned, you look at Sean Penn, and that's maybe the most charismatic and charming Sean Penn has been in almost ever. You know, it's been at least a couple decades, it feels like, since we've seen that side of Sean Penn. So, that's what worked. There's
Yeah.
a lot of great things that really worked about this movie. I think it's really a special thing when you can have a movie kind of meander for as long as this one did, but still keep your audience incredibly engaged and the stakes still feel really high, even though nothing's happened.
Yeah.
That would make you feel like stakes are deserved.
Yeah, agreed. And it's like, and the stuff that doesn't work from a filmmaking perspective, they're minimal. Honestly,
Yeah.
if the last category here that we're going to get to didn't exist, I think the idea that this movie's meandering, I almost wouldn't even really give credit to, because like I was so engaged, it doesn't matter. Not every movie has the same structure.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
And that's just the way this movie was, and for what it was trying to do, it does it very well.
And the reviews from critics and from the general public kind of echoed that sentiment, right? That it did execute exactly what it wanted to, and it executed very successfully. But there's two glaring issues with this movie that I think as this week has gone on, they've just kind of graded. I've thought about it every day.
Yeah.
Which again, we talk about him being a great director. If you want your art to be spoken about, if you want it to have an impact on people, like, bravo, well done. You've done it once again, PTA. But for me, a lot of the times it'd be thinking about, man, Daniel Plainview is so cool, or like this scene was so good, or like this tracking shot in Boogie Nights was so incredible. And while there were incredible tracking shots and one-shots and performances and all that good stuff in this movie, there was two things about it that really bothered me. And the first one is funny because it bothered me a lot while the movie was happening. It's bothered me about as much as it did then.
Yeah.
But I think it bothered you even more after it had kind of been said and done.
Yeah, there's the premise of what this movie is, which if you're watching this and you've gotten this far, you've probably seen it and you probably know where this is going, because this is becoming a popular theme to talk about this movie. There's some criticism of this movie it's taking.
And we'll talk about that in depth.
Yeah. But the bigger one, because it's sort of way, way harder to understand why it's in this movie, is there's a character who's a friend of Cooper Hoffman's, and he is married to what in the film appears to be like an Asian mail order bride. I think that's essentially...
It feels like she's a Japanese mail order bride, for sure.
And he owns a Japanese restaurant, and she's like speaking in Japanese, and he starts to talk to her, and he's doing like a very offensive Asian impression. Like a Japanese impression. And right when he starts, you can't tell if he is speaking Japanese or if he's actually speaking English that way.
Yeah.
It takes you a second to realize that he's just speaking English.
With like an insanely offensive Japanese accent. One that you would have seen like back in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s, I guess.
So when it happens, I did that thing where you laugh while also saying what? You know what I'm talking about? What?
What is this? Yeah.
Because it's so absurd as it's happening, it catches you and makes you laugh. Or it made me laugh right away because I was like, there's something happening here. The scene ended and they go back to the gimmick again later in the movie.
20 minutes later.
And it's another woman, and there's a question asked, and he's like, she doesn't even speak English.
Or no, it's another woman. It's a different bride.
Yeah.
But then he admits that he doesn't speak Japanese at the end of it. Because he speaks to her in this accent, this incredibly Japanese American accent. She responds in perfect Japanese. And the first time it happens with the first wife, I think that just like life goes on. He's like, yeah, could we change this thing about it? Could we talk more about the food? The second time, the Cooper Hoffman, I think, greets the wife, and he's like, oh, no, this is a different one. So that's the first thing, where it's like, oh, yeah, no, it's just another recycled mail-order bride. Of course they look the same. They're both Japanese. And then the second part is the accent again. And then the third part is like a button on the scene is when he goes, I don't know. I don't speak Japanese, after she responds to him in Japanese.
So what's weird about this is that this isn't a fundamental piece of the story they're telling. It doesn't serve the story. It's a, for lack of a better phrase, a colorful anecdote that PTA wants to add into this script because it's funny. And I'm sure, given PTA and like where he grew up, I'd be shocked if this wasn't inspired from something. Someone he knew, a story he heard once. I'm sure it has some root somewhere. Right. And I'm sure there were idiots that were like this in the 70s. I can't imagine this is like an isolated, fantastical situation. But in this particular movie, because this movie isn't about that, I don't really understand why it's in this movie. Like, he isn't that director. That's a lowbrow laugh. And after the fact, I was almost mad about it because, like, I was cackling as it was happening in the movie because I just trusted PTA, that there was something funny. I was allowed to laugh because it was a PTA movie. I was missing something. And after, when I look back on it, all it makes me feel like is like, bro, that was like really, really, really racist. And I like, it wasn't smart. You got me. I thought that this was absurd and I was supposed to think it was funny. And like, it wasn't funny.
Yeah, and sorry, this whole time I've tried to look up his name because I always forget it. I know it's 3 names. John Michael Higgins.
Yeah.
He's from like a lot of the Christopher Guest stuff. You know, he's a very, very funny comedic character actor. And it made me dislike him a little bit more, even though I know he didn't write the script and he just took a role in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which I would always do. Yeah, I think what's fascinating about this is like, I get it's the 70s.
Yeah.
I understand that. I know that this isn't the only moment of racism in the film. There's obviously the moment with Alana Haim and the casting director, who does an incredible job, where she talks about her nose being too Jewish, but how that's in right now, which alludes to Barbra Streisand, which comes in the movie later on. Even that small bit of like, Barbra Streisand is famous right now. She's going to come in the movie in a little bit. This is a reference that a casting director is making, which is like, in all movies, we see casting directors say horrible things. You're too fat, you're too tall, you're too skinny, you're too black, you're too white, whatever it is. So for some reason, that felt more appropriate. This, like you said, it doesn't add to the story at all. It's not brought up again later on. Both of the characters, you know, John Michael Higgins and his wives, neither of them ever come back into the story. And when I was watching the movie as an Asian American, I was like, actually uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And this week, literally, I watched all 9 of his movies. And I've seen all of them before, other than Licorice Pizza. And there's obviously uncomfortable moments in his movies, but I never felt uncomfortable watching them as much as I did in this moment. So, you know, okay. Little bit of funny racism here and there, no problem. It's only in 5 minutes of the film, right?
Well, you know, the last thing I want to add before we jump to the next part is that I know there's a sub-theme of this movie, which is that he is this kid who's basically running his own life, who's 15, whose parent is absent, and his leadership and mentorship that he's getting from older people comes from all places. And that he's kind of a fuck in this movie, and that, who knows? Maybe some of his bad tendencies come from people like this. That these are the people he interacts with.
That's fair,
right?
Yeah.
That some of his like growing up in the valley is like associating with people that maybe aren't doing it the right way. And I get it. So like, it doesn't condemn the movie. It makes the movie have a big question mark for me, which is like, I don't really get it.
Well, and also like, you know, I guess now the other last thing about this is like, you know, a big moment happened like this recently with a very esteemed, established, revered white director in Quentin Tarantino with his Bruce Lee moment.
Yeah.
Right? That was the thing that a lot of people talked about, especially in the Asian community. And like, you know, there were parts of that were definitely offensive. I think you can go either way. But like, there's also these rumors about Bruce Lee acting that way on set.
Yeah.
And like, I can't speak whether he did or did not. It's Quentin Tarantino making a joke about it, whatever. At least it's pulling from something that we can kind of trace back to where it came from. Even if it's not the best depiction of it, even if when I watch that scene, like, part of me hates it, part of me kind of likes it, there's nothing, at least that we've been shown or told, that gives any reason for this moment to be in the movie twice. So that was offensive. But again, Asians being made fun of in movies is something that I've kind of gotten used to.
And that's not grounds enough to have one problematic scene in a movie for me to sort of like
Write it off.
Yeah,
Right?
Not when this movie had so much I liked.
Yeah. I think, and the other thing that you and I were talking about is when it happened, it was like, all right, there's got to be something more to this. It's Paul Thomas Anderson, baby.
Right.
He's so smart. He's so funny. Like, there's a reason. And I think the fact that there never came to be any sort of reason or conclusion to that part of the story, I think it added to why it was offensive. The other part of it, which is much more, I guess, universally looked down upon, it's something that's never really been, like, celebrated in films, and that's the idea of, like, do we just call it pedophilia? Do we call it statutory rape? Do we call it two teenagers in love? Like, what do we actually call a 15-year-old and a 25-year-old that end the film with a kiss and I love you and they're dating? And also in the middle of the film, you know, she flashes him because he wants to see her boobs.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this. And I think the first part is, like, I'm aware of the fact that there are classic movies over the years with age differences in their couples. I'm aware of the fact that when you make a movie about something and you glorify or tell a story about a character who isn't necessarily doing things that are legal or sane or things you'd support, just because it's shown in a movie doesn't make it a bad movie. Like, I would never have that opinion, right? I wouldn't like a lot of my favorite movies. A lot of them have serial killers and murderers in them. Like, I love those movies, right? I think it's about Harold and Maude is obviously a huge age difference, a classic movie. Like, I think the issue with this movie is that basically you have this kid who's 15 and a male character who is going after a 25-year-old woman. And the premise of the movie is that his love for her and her sort of not doing anything in the world and entertaining his crush develops this friendship that turns into and is turning into something more. And in the end, when she flashes him and they kiss at the end of the movie, I understand that it just suggests what might happen after. We don't know because the movie doesn't get made. It's not like we have a scene of them like doing it. Like, right? The most we have is a scene of her flashing him. And it's a coming of age story in the sense that like they're both growing out of their moment that they're in because of this relationship. And that's really sweet. I give a lot of credit to that because that part of the movie actually works for me. When you don't really think about it and you just watch the movie you watch.
Well, and the casting, right? Like she doesn't look like a grown woman and he doesn't look like a child, right? Like I watched a movie yesterday that had, 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds in it it was a television show that had kids in high school in it. Yeah. And like they look a lot younger than Cooper Hoffman did. Yeah. It makes sense that like he's 18 playing 15, right? Like there's even just those 3 years, there's a lot of maturing that happens. So like, a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies have characters in it that are kind of gross, that are like not great characters, I mean, even in something is Tom Cruise in Magnolia, Dirk Diggler, period, in Boogie Nights. Like you look at, I don't need to go through his filmography. We're going to do that in a little bit, but like he's known for writing characters that are like not really the morally strongest people in the world. So I think the issue for me with this was like while watching the movie the whole time, until the moment where she flashes him and until the very end where they kiss and she says, "I love you," you're kind of okay with it happening because you're like, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know if they're going to fall in love. I don't know if this movie's going to do a time jump. I don't know. I don't know. But then when the movie ends, and the first thing that popped in my head was, what if a 25-year-old dude was talking to a 15-year-old girl and she said that she wanted to see him naked? Yeah. And he was like, "No way, man." And then he left. And then he came back and he was like, "Where's your little sister?" And she's like, "Oh, she's in the other room." And then he's like, "All right, come here." Yeah. And then he just flashes her.
Yeah. Here's my dick.
Yeah. That movie does not get made.
No, it doesn't.
There's no way in hell that is acceptable. And like, no matter what you want to call it, there's no in between. Yeah. And like, a lot of the things that I'll see people talking about online, or even when you and I spoke, or even when I spoke to my girlfriend about it, the idea of movies that deal with horrible things come out all the time. There's movies about murder. There's shows about You. You is one of the most popular shows of 2021. It's about a guy that kills people. He stalks them. He imprisons them. Like, he's a bad dude. And like, I don't think that show is great for some of those reasons because, like, hey, maybe you're a guy that's like in love with someone and now you watch this show and you think it's okay to stalk them. Yeah. But I think there's a clear differentiation and radical difference between like, I'm watching Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal Lecter is so cool and smart, I'm going to go kill someone now. Yeah. As opposed to, I'm 19, I'm watching Licorice Pizza, and I have a girlfriend that's 17. And that's not even close to as big of a gap as what they're showing in this movie. And look at how great these two characters are on screen. And I've been in love with this girl since I was 15. So like, it's only 2 years. It doesn't matter if there's a line drawn in the middle of it by the law. I think that's where things start to get really muddled and kind of icky.
Yeah, I mean, it's because the only real clear sign that what's happening with their relationship is not appropriate is that she says early on, "This isn't appropriate, I'm too old for you."
Yeah, and like with their friend, she's like, "Do you think this is weird? I'm hanging out with them."
And like, so that's where it starts, but then as the movie goes, like, you are just sort of led to believe that this is love, so it's okay. And like, again, it's hard to exactly know how I'll feel about this movie in, say, like 5 years. Like where I'm going to feel about these issues in 5 years, or the more I think about it, the more I read about it, the more I discuss it. But right now, as it stands walking out of it, it's a really difficult movie to just like want to immediately celebrate. Like, I can celebrate the good parts, but I don't really feel great about unless I talk about the bad parts. And so it's a really weird experience to have with a director because, like, as you said, like, PT has like basically classically been my favorite director. Yeah. And I mean, there's just a lot of discourse and conversation about this movie going on right now. And a lot of people, and like, some people are like, dude, it's a movie. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a movie. It's a story. Like, it's not real life.
Yeah,
Get
and
over
some
it.
of the reviews out there, like, you know, she is so swept up in his maturity beyond his years because he's a child star and how charismatic he is when they first meet and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. How would you feel if your 15-year-old kid was dating a 25-year-old?
Yeah.
Like, how would you feel if your 15-year-old kid was flashed by a 25-year-old?
And then you watched this movie. What would you like, right? It's like your
how would you
15-year-old
feel?
daughter's dating a 25-year-old guy, and she's trying to sell it to you, and you're like, that's illegal and inappropriate. And then you watch this movie. Would you feel good about the movie?
Right? Because then the movie is like, well, maybe it is.
Right.
Look at how great they are together. I think the idea that it perpetuates and the conversation that comes from it, and because of the way that conversations are, there's always going to be a plus and a negative. And there's like this whole group of people now that are going to argue that this is okay. Racism in this movie is fine. It was the 70s, bro. Get over it. Pedophilia or statutory rape is fine. It was the 70s, bro. Get over it. The 70s were 50 years ago. 50 years ago. So if we're going to make movies that talk about an era in which things happened, I think it's okay, but I think to glorify them or to like inject like they did with the Japanese wife just for like shits and gigs, because here's the other thing. How much color was there in this movie?
Yeah, very
like
little.
Maya Rudolph?
Yeah.
And then the Japanese wives, and then like probably a couple other tertiary characters or background actors here and there. Not to be that guy, but like if you're going to inject color into your film, it shouldn't be just because it's the butt of a joke and then the other piece of color is your wife. Right? Like, that was the other thing about it to me, which was just like, why, dude? You're so much funnier, smarter, more brilliant than this as a director. So I know that we're in the minority out there with
people
this.
love this movie.
People do love this movie, and like I said, and like we said, when we walked out of this movie at first, it felt good.
Yeah.
And then we kind of looked a little bit more closely at it, and especially over the last week, it's just kind of like been grating at me.
Yeah, look, I mean, there will continue to be conversation about this movie, and as we said, there's a lot of discourse about it, so I'm sure that this opinion will not be like entirely embraced by everyone watching. And if you love this movie and feel completely okay about it, and like you have a different opinion, that's fine. Like, it's art. You can appreciate art in any different way than I do or than you do. It's just, you know, when we're trying to like break this movie down and do it, I think in a way that feels intelligent and also responsible in how to appreciate art, at least needs to be acknowledged and discussed. I think talking about the other stuff up front's important, but this is real. This is a real part of the movie that needs to be addressed.
Right? Because the other part of it is like, well, what about the master? What you think that it's okay to just like start cults?
Yeah.
Or like, what about Phantom Thread? You think it's okay to just like rip apart your wife if you're like a brilliant man? Like, well, no.
Yeah.
I don't think those things are okay, but also like being a dick to your wife because you're successful and starting a cult, they're not illegal. Like, I guess maybe starting a cult is, but like, I don't know if it is.
Yeah.
Religious following, it's not the same level of like thing. Like, yeah, I don't like those things. I don't plan on signing up for porn now because I watched Boogie Nights, even though I could. And if people want to be sex workers, that's fine. But again, at the end of the day, what this movie promotes is like a 15-year-old and a 25-year-old falling in love.
And we support OnlyFans. We do. No.
We're going to cut that out. All right, so that's kind of our initial thoughts about Licorice Pizza. We're obviously going to talk about it a little bit more when we get into our rankings because PTA has only done 9 films. But before we get into who PTA is, let's talk about like Paul Thomas Anderson as a director. We always do this thing called a thesis statement every single show, every single topic, and it's this big, bold thought that we have that kind of encapsulates what we think about them or the thing that we're talking about, and today it's a them.
Yeah, the thesis statement for Paul Thomas Anderson is that PTA is the best director of actors currently in Hollywood, period. And you can say this for a bunch of reasons, I think. I think you start with the fact that if you look at his entire canon of films, everything that he's ever directed, he doesn't have a miss when it comes to the performances. He just doesn't. He doesn't have a single one, even going back to Hard 8, which is a movie that doesn't get a lot of credit. In fact, so much so that I think a lot of people forget it even exists. It's his movie that he made before Boogie Nights. It's I think came out in like 1996 maybe, and it's Philip Baker Hall, John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow, Samuel L. Jackson, and a small performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
Who's sweet in the movie.
He is sweet.
But the performances are great in this movie, and it's like his first movie as a director. He even had this movie taken away from him by the studio. He kind of hates this movie for that reason. But you go from there all the way through Licorice Pizza, and you cannot tell me that there's a single movie that doesn't have at least one like phenomenal performance in it.
Yeah, and like you talk about people that are under-celebrated dramatic actors and what he's done for them in their career. You know, Philip Baker Hall's best moments in his career, I feel like, come from his moments in Paul Thomas Anderson films. You look at John C. Reilly as a dramatic actor, hasn't been given a ton of opportunities. You know, Gwyneth Paltrow is someone that did a really good job in Hard Eight. She never really shows up again. Philip Seymour Hoffman like built his career with Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of people that he's always looked at and been like, I can make you something great. And just like he did with two newcomers in the most recent film of Licorice Pizza, but like, yeah, they're incredible. Like, whether it's taking someone like Mark Wahlberg, who has now proven with 20 more years of doing films that, like, at least in my opinion, Dirk Diggler is the best he ever was as an actor.
Yeah, because you can look at a lot of the other biggest directors from the last 20 years or so, people who are still really making big movies, and you can say similar things, right? Like, for instance, David Fincher, we talked about on the show a lot. I love David Fincher. He is probably the other guy on the corner for me of, like, favorite director.
Yeah.
But Alien 3 is a really bad movie, and the performances in Alien 3 are not good. They are not good. And a lot of the game is not great performances. Like, the game has some rough stuff in it, you know? Like, not everything he touches is solid gold. And
You go to Christopher Nolan, you love Pacino in Insomnia. Yeah. He's just tired, man. I mean, he's supposed to be, but yeah. And then you watch Following, even though that movie took like, I don't know, like years to shoot or something, or like he shot it over a year, like on weekends, and it wasn't like with real actors or anything. Like, at the end of the day, it's still in his filmography. You know, it's a feature-length film in his filmography. We're not talking about short films here, and
some of the movies in Nolan's catalog, like some of the issues I have with a few of his movies are the performances. I don't like Aaron Eckhart in The Dark Knight. It's like it's my biggest criticism of that movie is I dislike him in that movie. I don't think I don't think he kills it. Like, he's just not my favorite part of that movie.
And then you look at the other guys like Scorsese and Spielberg, right, who have done so many years, so many decades. The problem is when you have that vast of a filmography, there's going to be a couple weak spots in there, in both of their careers.
There are just misses, yeah, and it's just something about the fact that I think PT has such control over the material because he writes everything, because the approach is so unique. He takes his time. I mean, similar to some of these other guys, but like PT has had long stretches in his career. I mean, Magnolia came out in '99. He made Punch Drunk Love in '02. He didn't make another movie for 5 years, right? He took another 5 years after that. I mean, he between 2007 and 2012, he only literally made 3 movies, right? Like, he takes long stretches off when it comes to directing because he really wants to be deliberate with the project and have a lot of control over where it's going to go.
And you talk about, like, Heather Graham, Paul Dano, Thomas Jane, once again, Mark Wahlberg, like, all these people do great jobs. Adam Sandler does a great job. And then you talk about the other side of it, which is like, oh yeah, he's made numerous films with some of the best actors that have ever done it. In Philip Seymour Hoffman, in Joaquin Phoenix, in Daniel Day-Lewis, in Julianne Moore. There's so much there that I think truly in 9 films, if you go back, there is not one bad performance, which is crazy to think about.
It is, and I think because it's that self-fulfilling prophecy of if you get the best performances out of the best actors, then the best actors are going to want to work with you.
Yes.
I mean, you look at some of the people you just named, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Daniel Day-Lewis and Joaquin Phoenix. Those are like on the short list of 3 of the best actors of the generation.
Ever.
Right?
I bet. When we look back, or when history looks back, in 100 years from now, I still think those 3 guys will be talked about, like, in the sense of, like, oh yeah, those were the greatest actors of the 90s and 2000s.
It's actually kind of astonishing that Christian Bale hasn't been in a PT movie, right?
I know.
Isn't that crazy? It's like he feels like one of the guys who like you would expect to sign up at some point.
It feels like they would work so well together.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you look at Julianne Moore and like what she does in his movies. She's just always just astounding, breathtakingly brilliant. So, you know, when I think about Paul Thomas Anderson and I think about all my favorite roles of the movies he's directed, there's like a few that really pop in my head. Like, it's so funny, like Philip Seymour Hoffman in The Master is definitely like the best that Philip Seymour Hoffman maybe was with him. But then, like, I like Scotty J a little bit more, and I like what's his character's name in Magnolia?
Phil Parma. Do you have like a full on just 100% favorite PT role? Like, is there one that stands out to you that is just like the one?
Yeah, I think I think on paper it has to be Daniel Day-Lewis as Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood. It's so good, and the movie is just so much of just him.
Yeah.
That it's like, all right, this guy is arguably the best actor of our generation, and he is the most dialed in I've ever seen him in this role.
Because there's like scenes in There Will Be Blood, like when they're at the restaurant and the other guys are at the other table.
Yeah.
And it's just like it literally feels like Daniel Day-Lewis, and they're just like, he's like, point the camera at me. I'm gonna unload now.
Just watch me.
Yeah.
Just let me do my thing.
And he's just so locked into the character. Like, blah, 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 like
yeah. He's got the napkin over his head, and he's like, oh, the first time he's like, I'll come into your house and I'll cut your throat.
That part's so incredible.
He's like, what?
Yeah.
What did you say to me?
Yeah.
Daniel, what? It's like, when I was watching There Will Be Blood, I'm like, the show Succession was just based off of him. He's horrible, but you root for him.
Yeah.
You don't want him to lose, even though he'll do anything fucked up and depraved to win. I love that. And then still to this day, I think when you look at Mark Wahlberg in Boogie Nights, it's one of the greatest castings ever, because he was just coming hot off being Marky Mark.
Yeah.
And I think he really was able to harness and hone that energy that Dirk Diggler needed. But then when you look at the other parts of that movie when he's broken, whether it's with his mom or with the coke or what he has, or the 9, or what is it called, the 8 Mile Stare, what do they call that, whatever, when he's staring off as Dirk Diggler, there's some really great stuff in there. So those would probably be my two.
Your two? I think it's so difficult, but I think that probably my number one favorite performance he's ever directed, I think it's Julianne Moore in Magnolia. And I mean, it's not because I think that it's necessarily better or that I have more affection for it than some of the others, but I think it's because it might just be my favorite performance by an actress ever.
Don't you call me lady! I come in here, I give these things to you, you check, you make your phone calls, look suspicious, ask questions. I'm sick! I have sickness all around me, and you fucking ask me my life? What's wrong? I'm using death in your bed, in your house. Where's your fucking decency? And then I'm asked fucking questions. What's wrong? Suck my dick! That's what's wrong, and you fucking call me lady? Shame on you!
She's so over the top and so extra in that movie and all the scenes. I've watched her scenes in that movie, and I've watched that movie probably 15 times, but I've watched her scenes in that movie and additional times. There's just all these amazing moments that she has, the way that it plays with the music. I don't know. I adore her in that movie. She's probably my favorite.
Oh, and Alfred Molina in Boogie Nights.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's really tough because Julianne Moore, for me, it's a total toss-up between Magnolia and Boogie Nights, because her stuff in Boogie Nights,
waves, yeah.
I think what blows me away the most in Boogie Nights is the ability of great actors to act poorly.
Yeah.
Whenever she's on camera shooting for Jack Horner, her acting gets so incredibly bad. It's hilarious, but it just goes to show you, that's what Julianne Moore could actually be like if she wasn't incredible. But since she's so good, she could be that great outside of the set the film that they're shooting in Boogie Nights, or she could be that horrible porn star actress. The range that she shows in that, and then the relationship with her and her kid and her estranged husband and Heather Graham, she is just the best.
I mean, I could legitimately just do a ranking of every performance in Magnolia. I could literally that's its own conversation for me, because honestly, even the smaller characters in that movie, like Jason Robards, for instance,
so good.
They're just so good. So yeah, I mean, I really think she's probably number one. And then my rewatch of There Will Be Blood, Daniel Plainview is just such an unbeatable, and this doesn't even mention Cruz in Magnolia, but I mean Plainview is such an iconic performance in film history. The rewatch of the movie it's almost irresponsible to say anything but that when you talk about the career, because it's one of the definitive performances of the century. You would have to find me Heath Ledger's Joker. There's a couple performances that are actually on the same level. There's just not many.
You just want to watch that guy exist.
Yeah.
That's why I think the movie starts off 20 minutes, the first 20 minutes is basically a silent movie, because it's this is Daniel Day-Lewis. This is not a guy looking for silver out in the middle of nowhere and then finds oil. This is Daniel Day-Lewis just doing this.
Yes, I made a deal with Union. My son is happy. He's safe.
Congratulations.
I'm taking care of him now, so...
Excellent.
You look like a fool, don't you, Tilford?
Yes.
Yes.
The other thing, or the other one that pops into my head is Joaquin in The Master. He's like, from the way that he walks to the way that he talks to like being able to just like see the PTSD on his face and his actions is really incredible. But yeah, so I think all those things speak to exactly what our thesis statement is, which is that Paul Thomas Anderson is the best director of actors currently working. So who is Paul Thomas Anderson? Well, if you guys don't know, he grew up here in LA, in the Valley, which is why so many of his movies take place in the Valley, whether it's Boogie Nights, Licorice Pizza, Magnolia. They're all hanging out here in SoCal. He went to Santa Monica College, which is like a mile away from here.
So when you guys used to hear me talk about going to the track to like run stairs, that's it. It's the Santa Monica College. I'd walk there all the time.
And then after Santa Monica College, he went on to Emerson, where his teacher was David Foster Wallace. Sick. So it's like, talk about being groomed to be an incredible writer. He ended up at NYU, so a great trajectory there. You know, from LA to Emerson to NYU, he was kind of set up to be successful. And then when you look at his career, he's a guy that's been around for a long time. It's been almost 30 years now. He's only directed 9 films. He married Maya Rudolph back in the early 2000s, 2001. They have 4 kids, and like he got his career starting off and still does directing music videos.
Yeah, he did a Tom York project recently. He's very involved with music. Obviously, Haim, the band Haim, that's where a lot of Haim comes from. Anima, the Tom York project, or any of the other things. I mean, that's kind of been his world for a long time. And he's just one of these guys whose success was so massive in the early part of his career that he just really was able to ride that wave for a very long time and continues to be able to. In the 90s, he was really referred to as the new Tarantino. There was a lot of hype surrounding it when Boogie Nights came out. There's even a story about Tarantino, like they sat down once and had a conversation because like we've talked about it before here. Tarantino is like considered like a rock star director. Yeah. Like he is discussed that way. He's one of the few directors ever really who his fame is more famous than even his movies. Like he's more famous than his movies.
That's actually a really good way of putting it.
And like PTA didn't end up being that way because of the movies he chose to make, I think. He made a lot of weird movies in his career. Yeah. But in the early part of his career, it was the era of the rock star director where people wanted directors to be that way. There was real interest in the 90s for that. And he was sort of lined up to be that guy. And so a lot of his career was sort of surrounding that. He ended up making the Dirk Diggler story, which is a short in film school that turned into Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights got his career going. And I mean, we mentioned the directing actors thing. I think to this point, he's directed 8 performances that have been nominated for Oscars.
Wow. With only the one win with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis is the one win. And plus, he's been nominated himself for 8 Oscars going into this film.
Yeah, and he still has not won. So, guys, before we get into the next part of the show, which is actually going to be ranking the best and the worst, talking through the ratings and reviews online on Rotten Tomatoes, and, of course, on IMDb, check in with us. Let us know what you guys are thinking about the episode so far. Did we miss with Licorice Pizza? And if we did, let us know your thoughts. Let us know maybe where you're coming from, things that we might have missed. Best way to do that is hit us up on Twitter. Ben and I are always on Twitter. We love interacting with you guys at Andrew Ghai, at Ben Bateman Media, or you can find us collectively at Team Action Show. Screenshot your phone, screenshot your top 9 rankings of Paul Thomas Anderson, tag us. Screenshot Licorice Pizza. Tag us. Start a conversation. We would love to talk to you guys. And of course, if you guys leave a rating or review, we will shout you out and we will read that review on air next week when we do the best and the worst of Scream. This is going to be a lot of fun. You and I are going to go see a screener of Scream in a few days.
You guys are hearing this probably, in fact, the day we are going to see it. So you guys are listening to this on the day that we'll be screening the film, provided that the craziness of the world right now doesn't shut that down. But let's cross our fingers. This is really happening. And we're excited to talk about the Scream franchise. It's such a beloved franchise. We briefly considered adding the scary movies into this episode, but I think we're going to try to keep it pure. So
yeah, it's crazy because like when we were growing up, Scream and like Blair Witch Project, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, there was like a lot of these franchises that started, or a lot of movies that became like really iconic in horror movie history, were all kind of coming out like when we were coming up. That's that next generation that came after the 80s, right? Because the 80s felt like the first time that like all the really great franchises started.
Yeah, I think horror, and we'll talk about this a lot next week, but I know the initial surge of like the late 70s, mid 80s horror thing sort of ended there, and it was dormant for almost a decade, and Scream kind of reinvigorates the genre. And you have Scream that then turns into everything you mentioned, which then really stays that way until the remakes all started which is the late 2000s. Like that's the next era when everything
is-
starts getting remade.
This is the fifth one, right?
This is the fifth Scream.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm excited to watch them. So here we go. Getting to the rankings of the 3 best PTA movies and the 3 worst PTA movies. And if you haven't figured out what PTA means by now,
Parent Teacher Conference.
Association.
Wait, what?
Wait, what? So Paul Thomas Anderson's 3 best movies. We take this as critic scores on Rotten Tomatoes, and just remember, guys, as a caveat, Rotten Tomatoes is not like I give this movie a 74%. It is you like it or you don't, and then those pluses and minuses lead to this percentage score.
Best ones, best rated movie across the board on Rotten Tomatoes is going to be Boogie Nights with a 93%. His next 3 are all tied at 91. So crazy how much success this guy's had. There Will Be Blood, Licorice Pizza, and Phantom Thread, all with 91s, and then The Master at 84%. I mean, indicative truly of when we talked about how much he is like the hipster director. These are not easy movies to enjoy by and large. I would in fact argue that of the movies we just named, only one of them is an easy watch. The other 4 all take a little bit of effort to get through, yet they're all rated that high. His 3 worst films collectively are Inherent Vice at 73%, Punch Drunk Love at 79%, and Hard 8 at 81%.
Did you feel sad that the only one left out of the top and the bottom was Magnolia?
I just think people are idiots.
Well, it's funny because if you look at Magnolia, it actually has, if I'm not mistaken, as I look here, if you look an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 8.0 on IMDb, it actually has, I believe, the closest scores when you talk about the 2 sites ratings.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, Boogie Nights, 7.9 on IMDb, 93 on Rotten Tomatoes. Master, 7.2 on IMDb, 84%. And I think the biggest gap is the 91% rated Phantom Thread and a 7.5 on IMDb. So at the end of the day, his worst score out there is a 6.7 on IMDb and a 73%, and both of those go to Inherent Vice. So when you talk about your entire career being above 70+%,
It's amazing.
yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And then of course Licorice Pizza, 91 and 81. It is his, tied for second highest rated reviewed film.
And for those that sort of are confused about how these numbers work, what ends up happening with IMDb is that really that site became prominent as a rating tool for people in the late 90s, early 2000s. So movies, for instance, take a movie like Boogie Nights. It makes sense that Boogie Nights would have a relatively medium score because he's so revered as a filmmaker now by like real films, in the same way that Boogie Nights and Magnolia were both nominated for writing. Whereas if you talk about those movies today, most people acknowledge them as true classics.
Yeah.
Movies that would have been nominated for Best Picture without even a slight hesitation. Those movies were both rated when the site was sort of newer, and they were still considered like, very good movies, but a lot of older fuddy-duddy critics were like,
Yeah, because I think, those movies were definitely way ahead of their time when you talk about when they came out and kind of the things that he wanted to accomplish. And also, when we look at 2+, close to 3-hour run times, it's pretty common now in 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a thing we expect. It's a thing we even get excited for sometimes. If you're really excited about the property, you're like, oh my God, the new X movie is 2.5 hours long. Like, oh my God, this is great. So, while we love Rotten Tomatoes, while we love IMDb and we love the top 250 and all that, that's not how we decide who and what ends up on the top of our best and worst lists. We have our own little categorization. Is that what I'm looking for? Categorization.
Sick.
Yeah.
It's a very, very careful formula. It's one that we stick to every week. Every once in a while we change it up, but when we're doing something like this, filmmaker who we're just talking about the movies and how we feel about them and how you would probably feel about them, or we hope you feel about them, this is what we use. So we start out with the once a year movie versus the never again movie. That's the first category, and it's kind of ultimately like what's the most rewatchable movie versus what's the movie you just never want to go back to. And this is fascinating because I want to watch Licorice Pizza again.
I do too.
I really would like to watch it again and talk about it. So it just because it's a divisive movie with some stuff that
and I want to watch
work.
it with other people.
Yeah.
Right? Like not that I didn't want to not that watching it with you wasn't what I wanted. I want to watch it with other people numerous times to see what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Am I crazy here? So yeah, like you said, this is kind of like rewatchability, the once a year movie versus the never again movie. What's your never again movie? Since we both agree it's not Licorice Pizza.
My never again movie is Inherent Vice. I watched this movie once. It came out at a time when I think I really wanted to be excited about a PTA movie.
Yeah.
I was really excited this movie was coming, and it started the trend for me, which was him just not really making movies that felt like what I wanted. Like, I remember even watching the trailer for Inherent Vice and being like, I hope that's good, but I'll be honest, it doesn't look like it's going to be good. And in the end, it's funny and it's quirky, but it's confused and it goes all over the place. And there's so many characters and it isn't a movie that, like, when I think about the best part, the moment I don't have one. There isn't one.
Well, I think the biggest issue with Inherent Vice in that sense is that, like, it's set up. I mean, he's a PI, right? So if your main character is a private investigator, that means there's got to be like a whodunit, gotcha, like incredible revealing scene usually, where it all falls together. And I think Inherent Vice kind of struggles because it's like, it's so like sprawling. There's so many different characters that have so many different relationships with each other that, like, while I think that movie is actually pretty funny, there's not much payoff.
Yeah.
There's a couple good scenes in it, but, like, it just kind of misses the mark a little bit. I agree. I think for me, the one that's my never again movie is Phantom Thread.
That's so funny.
And it feels so wrong.
Yeah.
Because, like, Daniel Day-Lewis, like, I idolize him. Paul Thomas Anderson, one of my favorite directors, period. Like, you talk about it being somewhat of a period piece. Like, it won the Oscar for costume design, right? Because it's incredible. Like, he's this amazing dressmaker. And you see, like, in the same way that when you watch There Will Be Blood and you're like, man, I had no idea this is how you got oil back then.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same thing with when you watch Phantom Thread. You're like, Jesus, like, this is what a master of dressmaking is, like, would have to do. And these are the things. And this is the amount of measurements and blah, 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 blah. I just don't care. As much as I want to care, I don't give a shit.
It's funny because this movie, like I said, it started the trend. I remember it came out, and I remember just thinking, like, yeah, I should watch it. I'd like to. I really like Paul Thomas Anderson. And this came out by the time that you and I were already in the space talking about movies, pretty professionally. I kept waiting to watch it. I kept waiting, and I finally watched it, like, almost in 2019, I think, for the first time. Maybe in 18 on a plane, but, like, it definitely took a while, and the parts about it that I liked, I really liked. I love Leslie Manville. Mm-hmm. She's great. He's incredible. I don't like Vicky Creeps. That's her name, right? Vicky Creeps. But I understand why. I've never wanted to rewatch it. I've had no interest in going back to rewatch it.
Yeah, and, like, the story is, like, he's an asshole and she's a waitress, and then he's powerful and she's not, but then she has power in their relationship, and then she poisons him and he gets better, and then she poisons him again, and they're okay with this, like, roundabout that they've signed up for life. Like, fine. For some reason, I just can't be bothered to care about it. So that's my never again. What's your once a year movie?
I mean, zero hesitation. You mentioned earlier that my favorite was always Magnolia. It has like more personal affection because it's like so many people are divided on how they feel about it, but it's always been Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
It has always been the one that I would go back to the most. It's like Boogie Nights is just like this. It's like this unicorn of a movie where it's like enjoyable from start to finish for me, and I find it to be more rewatchable than most movies, almost any movie.
And why, right?
Yeah.
It's so fucked up. There's drug abuse problems. There's, like, really intense scenes. There's, like, weird infidelity. There's suicide. There's, like, all of the worst things, but he captures it so brilliantly. And
I'm ready to fuck now, Jack.
Yeah, I'm ready to fuck now. It's my big dick. It's so good. It's my once a year movie also because, like, you know, I saved it for today. I watched all 9 movies except for Boogie Nights. So I watched 8 movies up until today, where I was like, you know what? Before I do the show, I want to watch my favorite one. I haven't seen it in a while. Like, and I watched it from beginning to end, frame by frame, and I just, even now, I still don't ever want that movie to end.
Yeah.
But when it does end, it's so great.
Yeah.
It finishes so wonderfully. It's one of those movies that PTA does that, like, it actually ends on, like, a very, very happy note for, like, everyone.
It's
almost everyone.
Almost everyone. I mean, they've been memorialized, Little Bill, and see a picture of him.
Colonel not doing so well.
Not so well. Yeah, not so well with the Colonel. Yeah, though seeing the Colonel again in Hard 8 was really funny. I forgot that he was in it. He has a small part.
But, like, you know, in Boogie Nights, they didn't, like, make Jack Horner okay with the Colonel.
No.
Right? He was immediately not okay with it. He cut him off instantly. And I know that's different, but it's still not quite as... Not super different, you know, from what we talked about at the beginning of the show. So the next category here is approachability, or as we like to call it, it's the recommendation movie versus the disclaimer movie. The movie that you would tell anyone to watch versus the movie that you might tell them to watch, but there's like a, hey, by the way, be ready for this thing.
Yeah, so we'll start with the caveat movie, and for me, it's kind of built on a lot of what this episode's talking about. I go Licorice Pizza. I think it's such a fun movie in a lot of ways that I really believe there's a lot of people, a lot of friends of mine who maybe are a little older who would we live in LA, so there's so much about this movie that people would relate to. I think it captures the time period so well, and a lot of the that we've mentioned the Bradley Cooper and Sean Penn stuff. It's really funny. They do a good job with the movie, so I think I'd recommend that stuff, but you would have to just sort of. I would have to explain it.
Things.
Yeah, you have to explain it right out the gate, just like, hey. There is this one element to the movie, and it's almost like, do I explain it or do I not explain it? Because if I'm going to recommend it, I probably should explain it.
Right.
And so it's weird, and I think, but it's a really good movie otherwise.
Yeah, no, I totally feel you on this one, man. It was almost mine as well, the disclaimer movie, because it'd be like, so other than a couple spots of racism and the general plot of the film, it's really great. And if you don't know exactly what I mean by that, just watch it. Because again, Licorice Pizza is the type of movie I feel like if you didn't give someone a disclaimer and you were just watch Licorice Pizza, they might be like,
right, yeah, oh, you're into this, huh?
Oh, okay, all right, Ben, that's weird. But then also you could not say anything and someone would watch it, be like, oh my god, I love that movie.
Yeah,
91%. For me, I think my big disclaimer movie is, I think it's The Master.
Yeah.
It's weird because it feels like it could also just be Boogie Nights, because people be like, oh, it's a good crime drama comedy
porno.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's one of those things where because I watch so many movies and my girlfriend works from home in the other room, I'm always like Boogie Nights is one of the movies I'm like, I just don't really want you to walk out during this movie and I have to explain myself. You know what I mean? Why is this scene happening now? And then you come out 20 minutes later, it's why is this scene happening now? You're like, babe, trust me, this movie's art.
She walks out with Dirk in the parking lot.
Yeah, you're like, okay. But for me, it's The Master, and I think the reason why is because you go, oh man, Academy Award winner Joaquin Phoenix going across from Academy Award winner Philip Seymour Hoffman, being directed by probably their favorite director to work for.
Yeah.
And the performances are incredible. I just think there's stuff in that movie that's it's a little hard to watch. It's, you have to really be willing to just watch the two of them, because the story is somewhat repetitive or cyclical, it feels like. I think there is still some really interesting stuff in that movie, to where it's if you're just watching a weird drama and then all of a sudden everyone's naked for this cult leader. I think this movie is just it's almost so hard to put my finger on what the disclaimer is that's why I have a disclaimer for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie when you tell somebody to watch something, there's always this amount of well, are they going to think I have good taste in movies when I tell them to watch this? And that's kind of what this category is about, is the recommendation movie, because we've seen more movies than most, and so when you recommend a movie to someone, it's are they going to make it through, or are they going to think it's stupid?
And I feel like if I recommended The Master to the wrong person, they would never want to hear my recommendation ever again, because they're just what is this?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So the disclaimer movie is that. What is your recommendation movie? The movie that you would tell everyone in the world, hey, you don't know Paul Thomas Anderson? Watch this movie.
It's I don't want to just keep defaulting, but it's just his filmography is such that there are issues and things to discuss that are so significant with all his movies, other than a few. There's not very many that are just a pure home run for anyone. Mm-hmm. And I just think if I recommend to you Boogie Nights, which is my recommendation, and you don't like it because it's too graphic, then I don't want to
be your friend.
We're not on the same page about what is enjoyable in a movie, because the graphic stuff in Boogie Nights, the porn stuff, just I don't even think about it. It doesn't feel like the movie is inappropriate at all to me. It feels funny.
Always a plot device. It's it's a really important plot device, as opposed to it just being there.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why is because I think just as easily with There Will Be Blood, it could be what I was just saying about The Master, where you might show someone There Will Be Blood and they're like, this is boring. I don't like this movie. I don't want to watch this. I don't care about this guy. He's an asshole. But I also think that There Will Be Blood could be a gateway drug to Paul Thomas Anderson.
Well, because I think with There Will Be Blood, the thing about it is, if you recommend There Will Be Blood to the person that you to like someone who is asking you, Andrew, for a movie recommendation, you're not like the guy at the office who they're like, you see anything good lately? You're like, oh, Fast and the Furious just came out. It's great.
Yeah.
Like if you like one genre and you see a few movies a year and this is the new thing that's good and that's your recommendation, fine. You work in the space, you review movies. If somebody asks you for a movie, then I feel like there's an understanding, at least on some level, which is why I'd be comfortable recommending Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
And if you say to them, hey, so There Will Be Blood, like, it's just a beautiful movie with one of the most towering performances by an actor of all time. Just be patient, and I promise you'll love it.
And it's incredibly linear. It's very, very easy to follow, whereas, like, I think Boogie Nights is super easy to follow as well, but even some people would be like, there's so many characters. Why? You know, like, why do I care about... I don't know who that
Love
person
that guy.
is. Yeah,
He comes up on this podcast sometimes. We should name him. We should have a name for him. His name's Barry.
His name's Barry. He's a moron. But yeah, so that's my recommended movie is There Will Be Blood. Also just because, like, you talk about the lack of critical acclaim that Paul Thomas Anderson has actually accomplished.
Yeah.
This is one of the few moments in his career where he... You thinking about Barry?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of the few
makes me
moments in
laugh.
his career where he actually was rewarded for it, even though it was for Daniel Day-Lewis and not him.
Yeah, right.
know?
He swung for the fences in that one for sure.
Yeah.
And then the final one is the lied about having seen it movie versus the oh yeah movie.
Right. The movie, this is all about visibility. This is the one where you're embarrassed if you haven't seen it, or the one that you like, oh, yeah, I forgot.
Right.
Paul Thomas Anderson did direct Punch Drunk Love, which is my, oh yeah movie. And I think the reason why this is my oh yeah movie, the movie that people always forget about, is because it's like pretty unspectacular.
Yeah.
It was done with one of the biggest movie stars the world has ever seen in Adam Sandler. Like even back when this movie came out in like 2007 or something.
Oh,
like that?
two, man.
02?
Like,
yeah,
it's like
so
right
he was in the height of it. It's like
the
right
heart
in
of
the
it.
heart of it. Yeah. So that I think is what it is for me, because like I like Punch Drunk Love. I think it actually, the pacing accompanied with the music is like some of the best. I mean, he does music with his films like brilliantly. That was another one of our like thesis statements that had kind of bounced around, but it's really hard to kind of put into words. So like for Punch Drunk Love, it's like, yeah, Adam Sandler at the peak of his career, Paul Thomas Anderson coming off of some of the best things, or if not the best things he's ever done, going into the next best thing, and There Will Be Blood. Like, it just felt like this is just totally forgotten about, because at least with Hard 8, you're like, oh yeah, that's the first movie he did. Or at least with Phantom Thread, you're like, oh yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis with Paul Thomas Anderson again. Or even The Master, it's like, oh, those two guys in a film together.
It's like almost with Punch Drunk Love, you get it exists and gets to be relevant because of everything you just mentioned. It's an Adam Sandler movie that's directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, it'll live on and people will continue to watch it and talk about it. That if it didn't have Adam Sandler, or if it wasn't directed by him,
yes,
it could just as easily be Spanglish. Like, Spanglish has a good director, right? Like, it's more of a drama. Like, you have certain movies that they just don't quite work, and Punch Drunk Love works enough that I think over the years, a lot of people have had a lot of affection for this movie. It's a very quirky movie. It's very interesting. It does have PTAs, flourishes. It's a smaller movie. It's not as big. He had just come off Magnolia, obviously, which is like a huge movie.
Huge ensemble.
And There Will Be Blood's a massive movie. So like, it's a much smaller movie than he had done, other than at that point, Hard 8, which was his first movie. And I think the reason I put this on my oh yeah is like, I saw this movie in high school because I loved Boogie Nights and Magnolia growing up. They were two of my favorite movies. And I was like, well, what else has he done? Because I think that Punch Drunk Love came out, and he'd only done 3 movies in my mind. I was like, oh, he has one other movie. At the time, we weren't streaming stuff yet, so I rented it from my local video store. And they had the original version called Sydney. It was the first, originally titled Sydney. And I took it home and I watched it, and I was like,
that's the main character's name.
It's yes.
Thank you, Barry.
And I watched it originally, and I was like, oh, that movie's good. I've never gone back to rewatch until this week getting ready for the show. Mm-hmm. And the thing I was struck by was like, I don't know how this movie is so universally like for people.
Yeah.
It's like a really enjoyable movie with huge actors. It's very simple. It's got good performances. It just feels like getting to watch an extension of a lot of the feeling that his first couple movies have. Mm-hmm. He's not working with as much, but you even have certain lines like I think it's Clementine says maybe, what now then, she has that line she says, which is the Magnolia line that keeps coming up. It opens with the song that is actually used in Boogie Nights in the scene in the parking lot. It's the same song.
Yeah.
You know, there are little pieces in this movie that are so significant to PTA's career that it's weird to me that he's so famous and this movie just never gets discussed.
Well, and like so many people love to talk about Following and Alien 3.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons they don't talk about Hard 8 is because it's just good.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not exceptional, but it's good. It's not like the thing that you can go like, oh man, Paul Thomas Anderson's first movie was a joke, but then he really found his footing. It's just like, yeah, Hard 8 happened.
It's like not trying to be anything other than exactly what it is. And I think for that reason, it's surprising. So it's like my oh yeah movie because I feel like people just breeze past it.
Yeah.
Versus on the other hand, this is my lied about having seen it movie. And, you know, for me, without a doubt.
It's the same for both of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phantom Thread.
100%.
And it's only because, like, I have to have seen all his movies at this point because I'm such a fan. And, like, even though some of them are less interesting to me, but, like, I just avoided this movie in the height of the moment when really, like, because I can forgive myself on Inherent Vice because it looked weirder. And in 2014, I was in a period where I wasn't really into movies as much. There was a few years where I didn't watch as many movies. So 2014 was right in there. So I didn't see a lot of stuff.
Right.
Like, it makes sense that I would have skipped a movie even though I love the director. But in 2017, we joined the Schmodown in 2017.
Yep.
We were literally competing in the championship, like tournament finals that year when this movie was a new release that people were talking about as an Oscar contender.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch it.
Yeah, it took a global pandemic to where I had to be locked indoors with no work for me to turn on Phantom Thread. It took me 3 years to watch Phantom Thread, and yeah, it's the same for me where it was just like I don't understand why I don't want to watch this movie.
Yeah.
I love Daniel Day-Lewis, I love Paul Thomas Anderson. Why? But I just didn't watch it for 3 years, and so yeah, for me it's the exact same thing. That is my lied about having seen it. And then once again, the oh yeah was Punch Drunk Love for me and Hard 8 for Ben. So now you've heard it. You've heard all of our conversations about the ratings, the reviews, the scores on IMDb. Now's the time for you guys to do what we were talking about earlier. Once again, just a reminder, rank your 9 Paul Thomas Anderson movies or your top 3 and your bottom 3. Tag us on Twitter. Let us know. Leave it down below in the comment section. We would love to see and hear your thoughts. We'd love to bounce back and forth with you. You know, there are only 2 of us in this room, so it's great to expand that conversation to the world of people that listen to the best and the worst and to kind of hear your guys' opinions. It's always nice to hear things that maybe we forget about or that we miss or we just, you know, doesn't even cross our minds. So guys, hit us up at Andrew Ghai, at Ben Bateman Media. Now it's time to get into the best and the worst of Paul Thomas Anderson.
And if you have made it this far and you're listening or you're watching, do us a favor. Either hit subscribe on YouTube, hit follow on Spotify, or follow the podcast on Apple. One way or another, we're going to be doing this every single week. We're going to try to keep up with pretty much a weekly schedule for the rest of 2021. We're really excited about it. It's been one of the most exciting new things we've done on this channel and with this brand for a long time. So if this is something that appeals to you, just buckle up. We've already done David Fincher, Chris Nolan, Best of Spider-Man. You can expect the Best of MCU coming up at some point in the future. Definitely the Best of Scream is next week.
Yeah.
You know, we're definitely excited about this show, so get hyped. All right, let's talk about the worst first.
Yep, let's go. Okay.
And this is far and away the most contentious. Like, this was the hardest one for us to agree on just because I feel like it's really difficult to land on exactly how I feel about most of the movies in his bottom few.
Yeah, so starting, we'll ease into it. We'll go 7, 8, 9 for you guys listening at home. His 7th best film or his 3rd worst film is Inherent Vice.
And this is a movie that I had more trouble with than you, I think. It sounds like the best parts of it appealed to you more on the rewatch.
Yeah.
I just have always felt this movie was like the least complete, the most like hodgepodge of a movie, and the most like getting away with a big cast and a brand name as a director and not much else. That's always how I felt about it.
And you know what? I don't actually disagree with anything that you're saying.
Yeah.
I watched it again yesterday, and it's like 30 plus minutes too long. It's like, what the fuck is going on? I've seen this movie 2 or 3 times. I'm going to go read the synopsis so I know exactly what's happened. But one thing I realized that happened yesterday was that I wanted to finish watching it.
Yeah.
And I kept laughing out loud.
It is funny.
It is actually pretty damn funny. And you know, Josh Brolin acting dumb, smart is like probably one of my favorite things ever.
Bigfoot's a good character.
He's a really good character. Yeah. And Joaquin's character is like, he's kind of a fuck up, but you're rooting for him like the whole time.
There's so many people in this movie too, right? You have like Owen Wilson in there, and
There's-
Catherine Waterston in there, and Reese Witherspoon in there,
Yes,
and like
yes.
it just goes on and on and on.
On and on and
Yeah.
on and on, and like it should have been so much more than it was. So that's why it is our number 7 film here. Our number 8. This is literally the hot takes and the divisiveness are going to come hot and heavy at number 8 and number 9. So number 8, I almost feel wrong saying it, but it's going to be Phantom Thread.
Now, for the record, guys, I was fighting before the show to try to have this above Inherent Vice because
Yes.
I think it's a better movie through and through.
It definitely is a better movie.
But this is our show. This is our show. And like you got to go by the metric of what we actually want to watch.
Yeah.
And so like I can't tell you. So I didn't rewatch these 2 movies. I had seen them both fairly recently. I think I watched them around the same time.
I watched both of them yesterday.
Okay, I watched both of these, I think, in 19. So I think so. I think I watched them both in 2019 around the same time. So I have a pretty like strong memory of both movies. I was watching them pretty closely. I was pretty aware of them. And my feeling is that if you ask me right now, which of the movies do you want to watch tonight? You're like, show's over. Now that we've talked about it, you got to watch one.
Boogie Nights.
I probably would go watch. I'd probably watch Inherent Vice.
Yeah,
I probably would.
And so this is what happened. This is my experience yesterday. Was like you and I talked on the phone in the morning, and I was like, I'm watching. I'm going to watch Phantom Thread today, and then I'm going to watch Boogie Nights, and I'm going to skip Inherent Vice, and I'm going to skip Magnolia, because I've seen Inherent Vice as much as I need to, and I've seen Magnolia numerous times. And then I turned on the first hour of Phantom Thread, and I could not get into it. I tried so hard to just be invested in these characters. And I was like, all right, I've watched like 12 movies this week. Like, let me just take a break. So I took a break for a couple hours, and I came back and I was like, I'm going to watch Inherent Vice. I just am. I was like, I don't know enough about it to really like have a conversation about it other than that I didn't like it. Inherent Vice kept me engaged for the whole, 2.5 hours. And then I went back to Phantom Thread later that night and I watched another 30 minutes and I just could not finish it. And I don't know why. Phantom Thread is a better movie. It's made better. It won an Oscar. It got nominated for Best Actor. Like, it got nominated for a bunch of things. And, like, you know, it was a contender for Best Picture. In like, that's what everyone was talking about it in 2017.
Well, the weirdest thing about PTA's filmography, you know, I mention him a lot. He's one of my childhood best friends, Yuval, who's been getting into our old show a lot. And he asks me a lot about movies because he listens to our old podcast from 4 or 5 years ago. So he'll have an opinion based on my opinion from 5 years ago. And he'll want to know, right?
Yeah.
And he was asking me about PTA, and I was like, well, yeah, like two of his movies are like of my favorites ever made. So he's an interesting director to talk about. But I was like, but truthfully, other than a few of his movies, I don't actually love almost any of his movies. I like don't really love most of his movies. And he's like, that's weird that you would say he's like your favorite director, but you don't love his movies. I was like, yeah, but and so when I look at our list, the way I feel about it is, it's like 4 through 9 are. I almost could rank,
They're all interchangeable.
I could almost put 9 at 4 and 4 at 9, and I like wouldn't even really flinch. Like, I can find elements in some of these movies on some days to convince you that, or I can convince myself that like, oh, that movie's brilliant, that's a masterpiece. But for me, it's pretty clearly like 3 and then everything else.
Right.
And so like, I think when we're talking about this list, it's, you know, I could argue for Phantom Thread at 7, but I don't have that strong of an argument.
Well, and I think expectation had a big thing to do with it. Like when Phantom Thread came out and the time went by and the way that people spoke about it and the awards that it won and did not win, I like looked at it and I was like, I think I know exactly what to expect. Whereas when I went into Inherent Vice the first time, I was expecting so much more and I got so much less.
Yeah.
And then yesterday, I think my expectations for both of them were about where I thought they should be. Like Phantom Thread, I knew exactly what to expect. And Inherent Vice, I knew exactly what not to expect. And then going and watching them, for some reason, Phantom Thread just did not deliver the way that I wanted it to. Whereas I think because my expectations were so low with Inherent Vice and the first time was so disappointing that I didn't actually enjoy how great Bigfoot was. I didn't actually catch some of those funnier lines. I didn't actually live in some of those better, long, dramatic moments. And since I knew I wasn't going to get like this amazing, like, you know, Guy Ritchie snatch moment where it all comes together, I wasn't waiting for it. So, which means if you guys have done, you know, the math here, you're probably thinking, well, what on earth could possibly be last? This is, I think, the hottest take we've maybe ever had on this show, and I'm very curious to see how this ages.
Yeah.
But our worst movie is Licorice Pizza.
Such a weird take. Such a weird hot take. I like, there's a big part of me that wants to on the spot revise it and like
Yeah.
switch it. But we're like so far down the road, and I can't talk myself into getting behind this story right now. It feels like day by day, as this movie has opened wider to more audiences, the initial critical reactions, while they still exist, there's so much more of a groundswell behind the stuff we're talking about. It feels like I just don't know where this movie is going to be in a year. I don't know how people are going to feel about it. I don't know if the Oscar nominations that everyone thinks are coming are not coming because of the stuff we're talking about. I think it's totally possible. This is going to end up being this weird blip on the radar thing that's an uncomfortable movie to talk about down the line. But I don't think I can really talk myself into, like, you know what? The stuff that's problematic, I'm just going to forgive because I like what I like. Because the truth is, I like a lot about Phantom Thread and Inherent Vice too.
Yeah.
I like a lot about all his movies. There's not really a movie he's ever made that doesn't have a lot in it that's fun or that I enjoy. And so if I'm going to make one last on my list, it feels correct. Though if this like wins Best Picture, I'm just sort of gonna be like, I just don't know what I'm doing with my opinion.
I know.
How is that possible?
I mean, to quote Mugatu, it feels like I'm taking crazy pills.
Yeah.
It really does. Like I feel like I feel like we're gonna get ripped apart for this idea on the show. I feel like when you look at his movies and where they're ranked and where they lie, like Licorice Pizza being last is like offensive, and like I don't know anything about movies, and like you don't like Paul Thomas Anderson and all these things, but like if I had to be on Rotten Tomatoes something, or on a TV show, or on anything, even on our channel, and it was like, all right, you have to fight to the death of why you think Licorice Pizza deserves to be ranked higher, or one of these other 8 movies that this guy's directed, all the problems, you know, included in all of them, right? All the things that you might say is a negative. Like, there's not one world where I can sit and think about arguing for Licorice Pizza and legitimizing those two things. Like, I can't think of sitting down and being like, well, I mean, look, and think about racism in the 70s that you don't understand. I can't see myself having that conversation. Or like, it added to the story because of this. And then the other part of it is like, I don't want to sit there and say, because this kid is charming and charismatic and beyond his years, it is okay for a 25-year-old to flash them.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so many parts of it that make me feel gross to argue about. And it also makes me feel like a prude, like lame, square, all those adjectives.
I know.
You know, like I feel like I'm so lame to not like this movie.
And I feel like I'm like part of woke Twitter or something, or like there's like this element to my opinion where I'm like, I'm gonna feel so dumb for having this opinion at some point. But like, no.
At the end of the day, I am Asian.
Yeah.
And when that scene happened, I was very uncomfortable. You're my best friend and you were laughing, and I felt very uncomfortable that you were laughing.
Yeah.
Even though I knew why you were laughing. I knew it wasn't because you're like, ha, I like racist jokes. This is funny. It was
I didn't
because,
really know
like,
why I was laughing.
It was like, haha, is this really happening? And then, haha, this must be happening for a reason because it's Paul Thomas Anderson. But like, yeah, man, it's like, it's
Barry
crazy
was
to me.
dying.
It's,
He thought it was-
yeah, Barry thought it was the funniest thing
This
he's
is
seen in his whole
hilarious.
life. So as crazy as it is, and the fact that it is tied for second on the highest reviewed on Rotten Tomatoes, number 9 for us is going to be Licorice Pizza. Please let us know your thoughts. We would love to hear them.
Yeah. So now we get to the good stuff.
Yes.
Now we get to the best. And again, rip us apart on tweet at us. Let us know. I'm curious to know what you guys think. And if you're watching this on video, leave your comments below. So let's get into the best. Number 3. God, I don't know if it feels wrong, but it is number 3 because the other 2 are that good. It's Magnolia. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this. When we first started talking movies back in 2015 and we started our first podcast, this was a movie that you'd seen, like, had you not seen it or you'd seen it once? I'm pretty
sure it was one of those things where it was like, oh, I've seen that movie, I think. Maybe I had, maybe I hadn't.
Yeah.
Like, I had no real attachment to that movie. I really do feel like I probably watched it once, like, stoned in college.
Yeah, okay. And then since you've watched it a handful of times.
I've probably seen it like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's
it's
like 15 hours of my life.
And it's a long movie. But the thing, I would say Magnolia is more densely packed with things I enjoy than any of his movies. That's what I can say. Because though it's not as good of a movie as Boogie Nights, it's still just, it's long and it has so many sequences that I just like. It's in some ways it's my favorite of his movies. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things about this movie that's like, if he just had maybe a little bit more going on, he could have turned it into 2 movies because there's so many great stories and characters. But the fact that it's 1 is fine. Like, whether you're talking about Robards and his family and Cruz and Philip Seymour Hoffman, or you're talking about the Quiz Kid, Donnie, or Philip Baker Hall, like, or John C. Reilly giving one of it. Like, there's so much good in this movie, and there's so much about this movie that's like exactly what you want from PTA, which is getting on that ride, letting the music and the performances guide you, not really caring where you end up. It's just that this one's just a little bit too long, and there is not enough of a linear path to follow, I think.
And the ending is not people's favorite. I don't love the ending either.
The raining the frogs.
There's some stuff too, like It's Not Gonna Stop, the song. There's just stuff in this movie that I think is like, it's not perfect. It has like stuff that's not perfect, and he has 2 perfect movies, so like this one is close. But I mean, there are just sequences in this movie that I think about. I love when Quiz Kid Donnie Smith walks in the bar and Goodbye Stranger hits. The way he times his songs,
everything, it's
just incredible. John C. Reilly at the table with Claudia, and they're having dinner, and I lost my gun today, and all that stuff. Like the kid rapping doesn't really work. There's just a lot of stuff in this movie that's
because
like,
that storyline's just completely never it's not discussed the way it was supposed to originally.
It's just kind of it's like sort of forgotten. I mean, if we're gonna say what's the best part about Magnolia, why is this movie amazing? If you haven't seen it before, why do you need to watch it? The best thing about Magnolia is that it's probably the best performance you'll ever watch from Tom Cruise. He's playing against type. He's playing a villain. He's playing it amazingly. He almost just single-handedly like steals the movie. And there are reflections of Cruise's own relationship to his father in the past, in the character. He is just remarkable in this role. He's so good.
Yeah, I mean, every one of the performances in this movie are absolutely like astonishing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you look at Julianne Moore in the pharmacy, you talk about Tom Cruise in the interview, you look at Jason Robards and Philip Seymour Hoffman on his deathbed, like all of those things, or even that I Lost My Gun Today scene is so good. It's just a little bit too long, a little bit of an odd ending. I think the frogs falling from the sky is like, I always try to I'm like, is this an homage
reference?
to the beginning when because Patton Oswalt gets like picked up and then dropped in the trees, but I'm like, that doesn't really make sense. So Magnolia is amazing. It's a little bit too long, but you talk about like PTA being the best director of actors, like what a great example of that.
And I also think like when you talk about the vignettes or like the relationships between the characters, it's the Cruise, Seymour Hoffman, Julianne Moore, Jason Robards portion of this movie that's the strongest.
Yes.
That's the like sliver or slice of this movie that if that had been its own hour 45 movie, would have just been like such a staggering, incredible, oh my God movie. And a lot of the other stuff works really well too. And I also love Bill Macy. But anyway, this movie's amazing. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. Julianne Moore is my spirit animal in this movie.
She's so good in this movie. Next up on our top 3, which will probably tell you what number 1 is, but number 2 for us is going to be There Will Be Blood. And why do you think this is number 2 instead of number 1?
It's a harder movie, I think, to appreciate. It takes more effort. It definitely takes more effort. It's a movie that's really great for a number of reasons, but it centers around being great for one reason. You have the most transcendent actor, basically, in some people's opinions, ever, on screen the whole time in like this tour de force performance. And if that doesn't appeal to you for some reason, if he's too much of a turnoff, or him just walking around and yelling about stuff and just like wanting oil is like not something you really want to watch. It's a tough watch. It's not a movie that like, I mean, he's horrible. Paul Dano can be divisive in this movie at times. He's kind of awful also, but like he's also kind of wonderful. I think this movie is pretty much flawless and perfect, and it's like a period piece and it looks incredible. I mean, all that stuff with the fire and the sunset behind him when he's walking is like just amazing to look at.
They have these amazing grand wide shots. You have like very real depictions of what it was like. You have those moments of PT. It's like insane intensity, whether it's like something falling and killing someone or whether it's the way the movie ends with, D-Day Lou beating Paul Dano to death with a bowling pin, which is amazing. I think when you talk about it like being like really just looking at this one evil person under a lens, or when you talk about it being a period piece, I think both those things can kind of be turnoffs sometimes.
Yeah.
And then for all the great that this score does for this movie, it doesn't quite feel as cool and as sexy
Yeah.
as the other movies, even Licorice Pizza, but definitely Magnolia and Boogie Nights. It feels a lot more like what the score does in Punch Drunk Love, where it's always heightening the emotion, heightening the intensity of the stakes.
Feels very it's very like Shining-esque. Like it's got a lot of that vibe to it. There's a bit of a horror aspect to this movie at times. It's a disturbing movie at times. For sure.
Yeah, I mean he will literally. I mean, when you think about his relationship with his quote unquote son in the movie, it's like he's just despicable. But he's amazing, and it's fun to watch. But if that's not what you want, if you don't care, if this movie could be deemed as a little bit too boring, I could see someone saying that.
I also think there's an element, you and I have joked about this before, but like we live in LA, we're in the entertainment business, and we're surrounded by people who are in the business of furthering themselves. They're selfish. It's their career. It's them. They want success. And I think he's a reflection in a lot of ways of people who are obsessed with this idea. They can't be happy for anyone else finding success. That's just one of his lines. What's exactly
He says, I want no one to succeed but me.
And that's like such a relatable character, but it's also a horrible character.
It is.
That part of him is this thing that when you watch it happen and you're watching it, it makes you, like, if you have any of that in you, it's hard to watch because it feels really grimy.
Well, when you watch There Will Be Blood, and I just finished watching Succession, I was talking to my girlfriend, and I was like, what's so fascinating about this show and Succession, and I think it's very similar with There Will Be Blood, especially the line you're talking about, is like, we see some of the darkest evil parts of ourselves in these characters, but we would never do that, which is why we love watching them. Like, I would never admit what Daniel Day-Lewis says in that moment, but like the idea of knowing that feeling, whatever that feeling is, we all have it somewhere deep down dark inside of us, and to be able to watch it, there's something like really fascinating that like draws you to it. Because it's always interesting when you watch something be celebrated that you are supposed to be pacifying. You've tried to keep down your whole life.
The final 15 minutes of this movie, his final scene with Paul Dano, it's probably the thing, going back to rewatch it, that I think I maybe appreciated the most. I remembered a lot about this movie, but I didn't remember the exact sequence and how incredible it is for him to get him to say the things that he says. And he says those have been drilled. Like, it's just the most like, I love you and I love this movie. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. Just like,
I am going to win. And there's I saw somewhere years ago, because I was so obsessed with this movie when it came out, after the baptism scene, and he leans in and shakes Paul Dano's hand. And
he says something to him, right?
He says something to him, and you can see Paul Dano's kind of shaken. At the end of the movie, he goes, I told you I would eat you. I told you I would eat you. That's what he says in that scene when he leans in and he goes, I'm going to eat you one day, or something like that. And then, it comes back later on. It's so good that he's so like disgusting and decrepit from his alcoholism. He chugs like a half a bottle of vodka, it looks like. There's so much to it. He's like, oh, do you mind if I make us a drink? And he's like, go ahead. He makes 3, and then he's like, I don't want one. It's like, there's just so much power play in that. It's so good. Which leads us to number 1.
And it's remarkable that he is the director that he is, and he's had the success that he's had, but I think many would agree that his best movie was the second he made, and it was from so long ago. I mean, this movie's from 25 years ago. This movie is 25 years old, and it's one of the greatest movies ever made, in my opinion. I mean, it's immaculate. The first hour of this movie is legitimately flawless. I think it's pretty much start to finish, but I mean, this first hour is such a ride. You're on such a like roller coaster of fun and excitement. I mean, the scene between Dirk and Reed at the pool when they first meet,
it's so good.
It's one of my favorite in film history.
Would you bench? Would you bench? Same time?
Same time. Oh, no, I would have seen you. I'm
there
every day.
Yeah, I'm there every day.
Have you seen Star Wars? Yeah, like 6 times. People tell me I look like Han Solo. Like, it'll never, that movie will never not get me. Scotty J, one of the most incredible characters in the history of film. Like, just such an amazing, just like, creation.
Don Cheadle as the cowboy, and then he turns to like looking like Rick James.
Yeah.
There's so much in that movie that's so great. Thomas Jane comes in, and he's phenomenal. It's like one of the best I've ever seen Thomas Jane. And like, you talk about William H. Macy in Magnolia, like, I love Little Bill in this movie, and Little Bill has such a important crux of the film, because like, you talk about that ride. You are literally on that ride until he kills himself. And then from that moment, it gets really grimy, really gritty, a lot more real. You see what the effect of fame and drugs will have on people. And, you know, I think you get one of the best scenes in movie history in the latter half of it when you get the drug deal gone bad scene with Alfred Molina. It is the most perfect marriage of drama and music and pacing and what the fuck is going on that I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, it's really a remarkable scene. It really is. It's and there's the 3 songs. The like Molina just kills it, and Tom Jane when he's losing it. Like, I mean, I love everything about this movie, man. I mean, Julianne Moore is incredible in this movie as well. There are so many sequences, and we haven't said Burt Reynolds' name once.
I know
in this whole podcast.
Yeah,
and it's like a crime because he's just amazing in this movie.
He's incredible. He's like the dad that you wished you had or something.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to explain it, but there's so much love from Jack Horner in that movie, even though he's in such like a quote unquote dirty business. But the way that he talks about how he wants to be remembered and the movies that he wants to make, it's like he truly is just like an artist that's caught in making pornography and like how much he cares about it. And, you know, talking about getting to that drug deal gone bad scene, you have the buildup of the scenes that have just happened where it's like Dirk in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And you have Julianne Moore and Heather Graham doing a bunch of coke, that also Julianne Moore losing custody once again.
I never want to leave this room.
Yeah, there's so much that builds. And then you have like Roller Girl beating that dude up.
Yeah,
with her, like,
tough scene.
The whole thing just builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it blows up.
Yeah.
And then it kind of all resolves very, very quickly. And that's the other thing I love about this movie that really bothered me about The Master was like, in The Master, when Joaquin just rides off into the sunset and steals the motorcycle, the movie could have just ended right there and it would have been great. Boogie Nights, I think, did it perfectly because it's like they have that huge climax scene and then there's a really quick wrap up and then it's just over.
Yeah.
It's just a happy, fun ending.
Yeah, I think...
except for the Colonel.
Yeah, except for the Colonel. I think there's a lot about this movie in the setup. I mean, I often think about the pool party. It's one of my favorite... It's just like one of my favorite... You meet Scotty J, the interaction between Reed and Dirk. You know, obviously when you have... the at that night when they're all in the hot tub, Dirk Diggler, you know what I mean? And he comes up with the name. And then when they're later pitching, it's like, his name is Brock Landers, Chess Rockwell, all that stuff. Even like the footage later when she's doing the documentary.
Like, those are great names.
yeah. Later when they're doing the footage and like, and he's showing it or whatever. And he's like, can you let me do my own blocking? And he's like, and Dirk said, he's like, I don't let him do his own blocking. Like, it's just amazing. I mean, the movie is, it's a unique movie. It's very hard to think of any movie that sort of does what Boogie Nights does as well as Boogie Nights. That's why it is on my all-time list of favorite films. Warrior is number 1, Boogie Nights is number 2. It's my second favorite movie ever made.
And when you talk about the way that movie starts, it's kind of like a weird, like almost daunting sounding soundtrack. And then it kicks into like funk in the 70s. And then it goes into that really beautiful one-shot tracking shot of introducing everyone that you're going to see in the movie all in that club. And it's just sheer movie making brilliance, which is why Boogie Nights is our number 1. So guys, that is the best and the worst of Paul Thomas Anderson. Boogie Nights, There Will Be Blood, Magnolia are our top 3, and our bottom 3 from worst to best. Licorice Pizza at number 9, very controversial there. Phantom Thread at number 8, also incredibly controversial. And then Inherent Vice at number 7, I think is maybe only controversial because a lot of people probably put it at 8 or 9.
Yeah. I wonder if we had collectively each had our own 9, if we had done it completely separate, how similar they would have been from 4 through 9. I think the top 3 would have probably been the same, is my guess, because we had no discussion there.
Yeah.
But 4 through 9, I wonder how different they would have been. I really don't know if I was fully doing it on my own. The only one I can really think of is that I think I would have had Inherent Vice lower, but I just don't really know where to put the rest of the movies. It's a weird ranking.
So we're really only missing 4 and 5 and 6, which are The Master, Hard 8, and Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting.
Right?
That's why we're doing the top 3 and the bottom 3.
Yeah.
And, you know, guys, let us know what you think about our ratings. What do you think about the hot takes we had this episode? Are we completely off base on Licorice Pizza? Do you think that we're just savages, and there's no reason that Phantom Thread should be in the bottom 3. It should maybe even be in the top 3. Is Boogie Nights not as good as we think it is? Let us know down below. Well, you're wrong about that one, but let us know what you know or what you think down below. Tag us on Twitter, leave us a comment if you are watching. Remember, Action Industries on YouTube is a great place to respond to us if you do want to watch. Otherwise, the last thing that we have to talk about before we say goodbye to you guys and say goodbye to our generals in the Action Army is what's left for Paul Thomas Anderson.
I think the big thing is just an Oscar.
He needs to win one.
And whether it's for writing or directing, you'd like to think that he'll have a Coen Brothers moment, like where there's like finally that one that connects. When No Country finally happened, it was like they had almost gotten there with Fargo, and then No Country was finally like picture and director. They got both, and it's like with PT, it almost felt that way, but it was the same years that.
Did Fargo win Best Writing and Best Actress? Is that what it was?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
exactly. And it was nominated for Best Picture, and it's a great movie. He probably will. Again, for a director, he's relatively young. 51. He's got a lot of these guys will go into their 60s.
Yeah,
they slow down. But given how much time he's comfortable taking off between movies, and also the nature of his last few movies. His last 3 movies, right, are Licorice Pizza, Inherent Vice, and then Phantom Thread between the two of them. None of those really, for me, is a movie that I am just cheering and celebrating. Licorice Pizza is the closest of the 3 to one that I'd be cheering and celebrating. But he hasn't, you know what I mean? He needs to make another There Will Be Blood, or he needs to make another movie that is just speaks a little bit more to the general zeitgeist, I think, to have a real shot at winning that Oscar.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the more interesting questions about Paul Thomas Anderson moving forward in his career and what's next is because I feel in general I've liked his movies kind of less and less as time has gone on, even though I like them. And it's really hard, right, when you start off with Boogie Nights and then you go Magnolia, and then you look at There Will Be Blood and the fact that it was already 14 years ago. Jesus. How does that even
15,
happen?
yeah,
15 years ago. That's insane.
And it's the 15th anniversary year, but it came out at the end of the year, so
right.
Yeah.
So I think he needs to win an Oscar. I actually really liked what you said earlier in the show about him working with Christian Bale.
Yeah.
I would really truly love to see that. We have this thing that we used to do on Action Movie Anatomy where it was buy or selling a brand.
Yeah.
Would you buy still on Paul Thomas Anderson?
Yeah, because the things that are good about Licorice Pizza are still so fucking good.
Yeah.
The successes of the movie are, I believe, what I said in the theater, which is the successes are the most similar to Boogie Nights and Magnolia since those movies. The successes have a lot of the same stuff going on. It's just that he just didn't, just did this weird thing. So
yeah, and I agree. I think that there's so much still left for Paul Thomas Anderson to offer. I don't really. For as much as you and I have things to say about Licorice Pizza, the general public seems to be okay with it. So I think it's a definite buy still on Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah, 100%. So thank you guys so much for watching this episode of The Best and the Worst. We'll be back next week with Scream.
Are you nervous at all about our thoughts, our opinions?
A little bit.
I'm a little nervous as well.
I really like the movie, but I also just every time I get into the position, I'm I'm just going to take a stronger stance on liking it. Then I'm what about the stuff that it has an issue? I do have an issue with those things. I'm not just talking myself into that to look good, Yeah. I don't know.
So sorry I cut you off. Next week we are going to be doing Scream. Be looking out for it. We're really, really excited about it. You and I are going to watch a screener earlier today if you're listening to this episode, and then we're going to do a best and the worst of all 5 Screams coming your way on our next episode. And of course, all these episodes are brought to you guys by our generals in our Action Army on Patreon, patreon.com/Team Action. These guys and girls have been supporting us for years now at the highest level, and we always like to shout them out at the end of this show.
So we're going to start out with Call Sign Kilmer, Call Sign Quiz Show, Call Sign Demon King. We'll stop saying Call Sign. Public Enemy number 1, Kaiju, ACP, Robin, Kimura, Moses, Galactus, Bartab, Party J, The Gray, 24601.
Call sign #Ladies Night, JFTB, Wonderland, Quinn, Brosnan, Desperado, Jerry, The Slap, The Rock, Entrapment, Stamos, Dante's Peak, Top Gun, and Gundam. Big time salute to you guys. Thank you so much. If you want to be shouted out on our episode, leave us a review. Let us know what you think about what we're doing. We'll read those reviews out live on air next week when we're talking Scream. Or join us, patreon.com/Team Action. I think that does it.
That'll do it.
See you guys later.
Bye, guys.